Right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to UNISA's Accelerated Masters and Doctoral Online Support Program. Today we have a brief session where we're going to look at the literature review revisited. And basically, many of you will remember that we had a session. We've had several sessions actually on the literature review, but in spite of that, there's a great number of you who have asked if I could revisit this topic and kind of do. My initial session was easy, then we had one that was much more difficult, and somewhere in that progression, some people feel that they got lost. So I was asked to do another version where we revisit the literature review, but I speak in much more simpler terms about the expectations. So this evening, this is what we're going to be doing. But before we get there, just some brief administrative things. As I've said, or I'm yet to say, my name is Tennyson Mukuchini. I am the project leader for this program that you're on. And this is a repeat look at literature review. Of course, it's not a repetition in terms of the exact session. I've changed some of the content to make it easier for you to get to grips with. So that's basically what the session is. Also, you will all recall that we spend a lot of time giving opportunity for you as students to come back and ask questions. So we will avail that, but this session in particular has been pre-recorded because we had some problems with electricity supplies all throughout the country. So this is the makeup session. I'm going to turn off my camera as per usual. I'm going to turn off my camera as per usual, and we will now specifically focus on the session that you have in front of you. Sorry, I started there for a little while. I'm just making sure that we have, I'm still connected to you in the way that I ought to be. So, because this is a pre-recorded session, the functionality for you to ask questions is kind of taken away, or at least to ask live questions is taken away. That means that once things are back to normal, we will have a question and answer session where we will specifically look at issues related to the literature review. And folks, the word literature review is used in many contexts. I want to be absolutely clear about the context in which we are exploring it today. And that context is we are looking at the literature review as one would present it in the second chapter of their dissertation, if they are doing a master's, or their thesis. So it is the literature review as related to chapter 2 of your study. And that's what we are focusing on today. Now, as I've already said, my name is Tennyson Mukuchini. I'm sure many of you are familiar with me already. Now, of course, there are some things that are part of the expectations of this session, but I will not focus on them in any specific depth because I have done that on 3 or 4 other presentations that you all have access to. If you go to our YouTube channel, you will find that we have maybe 3 or 4 pre-recorded sessions that look at the literature review. So things like defining what a literature review is, stating the importance of it in a very scripted way. All of that has already been done. There's also a session that looks at the different typologies. So, and this is an important differentiator, and many people talk about a literature review as if it's one type of thing. There are actually types of literature reviews, and each type serves a differing purpose. So I will just revisit those typologies, but for a much more in-depth exploration of them, the typologies have been looked at in previous and more detailed sessions. Remember, today's session is kind of patching the missing holes. It is not in its entirety the A to Z. It is more to do with completing the gaps that may exist for people who have some knowledge about what a literature review is. They have some knowledge about what the components of it, but they just struggle with that final step of putting it together. So this session here literally focuses on the putting it together story. But before we can, of course, get to putting this thing together, we have to walk you through very quickly what the components that you're putting together are. So you may find that, the session has good 30 or so slides, and out of that, there's really probably 3 or 4 slides that are what the crux of this session is all about. But to get to those 3 or 4, I must briefly touch on the others. So, of course, one of the requirements of knowing how to review literature is to actually find that literature. So we have a session also that talks to you about searching for literature, how you identify parameters being you figuring out where your interest in literature should start and where your interest in literature should stop. Identifying the words that you would use to kind of single out the literature that you're interested in. We'll also talk about previous sessions I've spoken about access to databases, search engines, and the like. And so all of that has been attended to, but it is an implied learning outcome within this session, because for me to talk about how you put it all together, I must have an assumption that this it that you're putting together is driven by data, by literature that you have found using the methods that we have spoken to you about already. Then, of course, the direction and focus of a literature review is essentially a story. It's a story that you as a researcher write for the reader. And to write that story, you may have many things that need to be spoken about, but you do need to spend a little bit of time deciding what comes at the beginning, what follows it, how you kind of create the story that is your literature review. So this is where things like brainstorming are useful, the use of relevance trees and other similar strategies is important. So we will touch on those. I have, of course, done all these things in much greater detail in previous sessions. And I have said this before, I will say it now, and I will continue to say it throughout the session, that this particular session is about the art of pulling it together, and less so about the teaching of basic concepts related to the literature review. I will have to make reference to those concepts, because for you to put things together, there is a need for you to make use of the concepts, but I will not be teaching them afresh, as it were. And the reason is, you literally have, if you just rewind a few weeks ago, you have specific sessions that are dedicated to the teaching of the elements of literature reviews, but none of those sessions, at least as far as the feedback has shown us, I have been able to assist you conclusively with how to put it together. So this is where this is where this particular session we're having today finds its place. Now, anyone who might have had their head stuck in the sand for whatever purpose, or they are disorientated about what it is, firstly, I was clear that the literature review I'm referring to is this more substantive literature review that you find when people are writing up their thesis or their dissertation, and you find that as chapter 2. So it is not any other type of literature review. People ask me, is this for my proposal? No, it is not. It is for when you are writing the actual final document that you will submit for examination. So, but in essence, a literature review in whatever space you find it, whether you find a literature review in a proposal, you find it in the chapters of the thesis or dissertation, it basically is about summarizing and discussing what has been previously published on the topic that you are interested in. So it's an overview of the literary contributions that have been made in relation to a topic. And remember, if it is research you are dealing with, research is about understanding problems, yes, through systematic, logical, and scientific ways. You know, I've given you the definition over and over again, but the standout feature about research is that it is interested in exploring and understanding problems or phenomena of interest. So really a literature review in the context of research is about this paper that gives you an overview, a summary. It gives you a discussion of what others have written about a particular topic, a particular question, a particular phenomenon. And of course, to do that, you have to consider past research, consider the strengths of that research, the contributions that that research makes, the strengths, the weaknesses, where it has potential viability for you, where it might not have that much relevance. So that is the nature. In essence, the total experience, the total feeling that someone should have when they read a literature review is that they should think, right, this piece, this chapter that I've looked at has attempted to summarize and discuss what has been published in relation to a topic. But as you and I know, the journey to that summary is one that is beset with decisions, many decisions. People, you know, so from the very get-go of you writing a literature review, there are so many decisions you make that I could literally give two people one research question to write a review on, and I should expect by all accounts that their literature reviews will not be the same, because everything is about decisions, and every decision has a cumulative impact on the next options that are available to you. So if you choose to turn left at the beginning, then your next decision will have to be one of the only options available for those who have turned left. And the more you do, the more decisions you make, the more differentiated you are from anyone else who may have been reviewing literature in the same way. Now, once again, I love the use of definitions because it reminds people about, or at least a good, well thought out, conceptually aligned definition. One that actually looks at the concept that we're talking about in its totalistic way. Once you have that definition, then you know that the description embedded in the definition tells you about how you should behave in relation to the thing that's being defined. So in research, a literature review is a systematic, so I expect systematic behaviors in the way you approach things, that you have to sit down and say, right, these are the range of systems that I will adopt and utilize. For example, you may decide, right, I'm going to use classic debating as my system of debating. Classic debating basically means that you present what you've chosen and you offer the reasons to support what you've chosen. Or some people will go for much more higher levels of debating as their basic system, where they contest different things and so forth. But the whole story about this is that you must always know that every decision you make within a literature review should be guided by some knowledge system. Can't just be a thumbsuck. But this should not surprise you, because all of research is about being systematic, so it should not surprise you at all. Explicit. So we said a review is systematic. I've given some insights into that. When we talk about the explicit nature of something, is that you must write in direct language. You must be transparent in your intended meaning. Don't spend time going back and forth, kind of hiding away from the things that you want to say. That scholarly directness is necessary. Of course, it must be balanced. You need to be direct, respectful of the contributions of others before you, but at the same time, be very clear about what your own view and position is in relation to those contributions. Then they talk about a reproducible method. So what they mean by reproducible is that when you do a literature review, it's got to be done in a way and presented in a way that someone else who is not you could actually reproduce it. And when I say reproduce it, they are clear about the methods you followed. They are clear about the detail of how you did what you did. So if they too wanted to have the same overview of the literature that you've had, they can actually just look at your own literature review and follow the steps that you define in it, and hopefully be able to find the same literature that you found, and so forth and so forth and so forth. Then, of course, here come the big things. So firstly, the literature review helps you to identify things. So somewhere in your story, when you're writing about this or writing this literature review, you need to show us, the reader, how you went about identifying the things that made it to the literature review. So later, when I get to the section where I talk about the structure of a literature review, you will realize that actually the earlier part of the literature review is about the processes that you followed in relation to identifying the literature that made it to your review. And that process we call the data search strategy. It's a strategy that you use for identifying your data. So the next thing is to do with evaluating and synthesizing the existing body of completed and recorded work. So evaluating. Basically, evaluation means you take something, you assess it, you assess and then reach a conclusion about its usefulness, its impact, its value, and so forth in relation to whatever function you expect it to have. So when you review papers, it's not just about describing what's happening. It's about evaluating the type of contribution that that paper has made to your question that you're interested in. So you realize now that there's a lot of gauging, where you gauge, you assess, you evaluate, you identify the real life contribution that a particular piece of literature makes to this thing that you're studying. Then the synthesizing means joining up. So yes, you can evaluate all these standalone things, but at the very end, you must join them up to find a collective, to make some collective sense of what's going on. So that this definition has already told you about the systematic expectations, the explicit nature of how you should be, the reproducible method expectations, the requirement for identification, evaluation, and synthesis of the existing body of literature out there. And of course, we're very specific about the type of literature we're interested in. We're interested in literature from researchers, scholars, and practitioners because we are in the space where scholarship is a critical defining expectation. So now these are some of the learning outcomes that the session attends to, but there are things that have been spoken to and already specified to you in previous sessions. I'm literally just restamping things that I believe you know, and I'm doing it in a way that's slightly different from the past in the hope that it gives you an opportunity to see this in a way you may not have seen it before. So another thing we've said, there are some characteristics of literature reviews. We've spoken about the systematic nature, we've spoken about the reproducible expectation and so forth. The other thing is that if you are genuinely saying, look, you're going to explore a particular research problem, one expects that your exploration will be comprehensive. And by comprehensive, I'm saying if there's literature that presents the left view and there's literature that presents the right view, the expectation of a literature review is that you cover both the left, the right, the middle, and all sorts of literature along that continuum. You can't just pick one side and decide that's what you present. So by definition, a literature review has to be devised in a way that allows you to actually cover the whole continuum of potential viewpoints and suggestions and standpoints that exist in relation to a particular question. So one would expect that when you identify this literature and you group it on a table or wherever you're grouping it, you are able to actually group the literature from those that say go left, the ones that say go to the middle, the ones that say go to the right, because there's an expectation that you've collected data in a comprehensive way from left to right, no points missed in between. Also, there's an up-to-date overview of published material. So we expect that your literature review should be as close to the today as possible. But everyone appreciates that all topics have a genesis. You cannot write about modern day Christianity without talking about the origins of it. So literally with the literature review, you do the same. But of course, the old contributions are only important in as far as the ones that are seminal contributions. When I say seminal, there are topics where there might be people that are considered godfathers, God symbols in relation to that topic. So one would expect that their work will be there somehow, because they are the founding fathers, they are the guiding force behind many of the things that we prioritize today. But in saying that, you can't genuinely say you have an up-to-date understanding without having literature that is recent and up-to-date. So that is where many of you come across supervisors and other people who say to you, you can't have literature older than 10 years or whatever many years. What they're really saying is that you are allowed to have foundational literature to paint the original picture, but your emphasis is about giving an up-to-date overview. And to do that, one would expect that the up-to-date overview would be one that is related to recent and up-to-date explorations. So remember that. Okay, so then you are going to have to apply your discretion about what constitutes significant contributions, what contributes relevant contributions. And to do this, there are systems of thinking you employ and so forth. So that's what the foundational bits of the literature, the foundations of what a literature review is. So now, These next few slides, literally the next 10 or so slides, are things that I have covered before, and I will mention them literally for 10 seconds per slide, so we can get to the crux of what this session is about. So when you do a literature review, of course, we expect you to have done a preliminary search. This is a bit where you go out and look for the relevant papers and so forth. And once you have those papers, you apply certain approaches to decide what papers fit, which papers don't, and so forth. Once you have got that, then you take those papers and you look at them, you process them through a critical literature reviewing process. And this is what this session that we have is really focusing on. Now, of course, how do you as an individual know that your literature review is good? You know it because it gives us all the important research trends in relation to your topic. All the topics it mentions, all the names it talks about are things that are the here and now in your field. It also helps you to get a sense of what's strong and weak about the current body of knowledge that exists. It also helps you to identify the gaps that exist in knowledge, so the things that have not been attended to up to this point. The literature review does that. And of course, it also, in identifying gaps, it tells you the things that have not been studied, and it therefore points you to things that need to be studied. All of this builds a nice crescendo towards you justifying your own study, the one that you are about to embark on. So if you have any form of work that you submit as a literature review, you must ask yourself, does it do these 4 or 5 things that I've highlighted on this slide? If it doesn't, then there's a problem. If it does, you are on the money. We talk about the different places in which you find literature. This is not going to be the purpose of this conversation. We, of course, know that when you get the literature, at first, when you get the literature, it's just all sorts of papers everywhere. But the more literature you get to get a sense of how you can focus in on the things that you're interested in. As you read more literature, it helps you to define what the real questions that are being asked in a field are. It also gives you a sense of how you argue a rationale for why your study and not any other study. And of course, it gives you a theoretical basis for why you are doing your study, and so forth and so forth. Those of you who are quite sharp to this, and I'm saying this because I think all of you are sharp to this, can then look at previous papers for the purposes of a literature review, but also to understand what methods and other things that these researchers have done, because that will help inform your data collection and all these other choices. So now, all that this slide shows you is that the literature review is a continuous self-regenerating thing, that people, you might come up with a particular thing that you're interested in, a particular research question that you're interested in. You have to take some time to define where your interest starts and where it ends. So look at this thing that's in front of you, starting from the left to the right. Once you have defined what your parameters of interest are, the next place is that you then say, so I'm interested in this topic from here to here. What are the key words that I think would help me to find the literature? And those key words, you get a lot of them from reading other literature related to yours. They all have keywords. You also think about the terms that have been made synonymous with your area of study. Then once you have those keywords, you are in a position now to conduct a search. You get the literature, you evaluate it, you record what's going on, and then sometimes you generate and refine the keywords again, and you go over and over again, and then you go on to the side where you develop the literature review and so forth. And then at the end, you end with the written version. All of this has been spoken to in much greater detail before previous sessions. Now, I'm not going to engage with this because I think we've spoken about the art of how you read and how you deal with that. Now, I need to mention five types of literature reviews that you encounter. I am not going to describe them, at least not all of them. I'll pick on two because I will refer to them when I speak to how you develop a literature review. But the other 4 or 5, they've been dealt with in previous sessions very thoroughly. So you need that, you go back to that. Now, there are literally more than 37, 40 different types of literature reviews that have been documented, but many of them are really versions of each other. The 5 dominant or so well-known types are one sometimes they call the narrative or thematic literature review. Narrative is where you literally sit down and say, this is the story that I want to write in relation to the question. I want to review literature that talks about how it all began, what the key arguments are, where the arguments have gone, what we agree on, what we disagree on, and where we go. So that is it. That's the first narrative type of thing. Then secondly, you come across what they call a systematic meta-analysis or meta-synthesis type of literature review. And this type of literature review, folks, relates to where people follow very rigid methodologies for assessing the literature that they have. Very rigid prescribed ways, so they will have maybe 40 questions that they ask of every one of their papers, and they comment on how each of the papers perform in relation to those things. Sometimes one of the things that happens with these types of reviews is that people are reviewing other reviews that have been done. Then we talk about an argumentative literature review, integrative theoretical literature review. These names change. Some places will talk about a critical literature review where they consider critical questions that have been asked in relation to a topic. But those are the basic typologies. I will play around with the names later on as we proceed and so forth. Now, the next thing that happens is, right, of course, you make a decision about what type of literature review option you will choose, but once you have made that choice about the type of literature review question that you'll choose, approach you'll choose, then you have to understand that the literature review as it stands is intended for one very specific or for very specific things. It's intended to be a summary overview of things. It's also meant to synthesize, pull together the key things that each of these contributing pieces of literature are saying. So in essence, it has that function of summarizing what's going on, but summarizing, not just summarizing for the fact of making shorter, but drawing together the arguments that each of the materials that you are looking at present. So talks about existing debates and theories, and then of course, because we are reviewing literature that relates to research, it is incumbent upon us to critique the methodologies that were used. So if the research is methodologically weak, you are in a position to comment on it. If you think there are some methodological choices that the research makes use of, which you believe are important, then you draw upon those. Okay, so apart from the summary and synthesis function, there's the comparison and critique bit that literature reviews, as you would expect, allow you to compare different pieces of work, to compare their conclusions, the methods by which they got to where they got to, and then to critique all of that. So that's what the certain functions that relate to this are. Now, of course, remember You've identified all the individual contributions that are made by things, but it makes no sense unless you can put it all together. And that putting it all together is in part related to the principle that you believe in. So if you are a person who believes that putting it all together should be a product of a methodological, if you think that putting it all together should be the product of you putting arguments together, then you're likely to be someone who's chosen an argumentative approach. Or if you're someone who thinks putting it all together is about putting together the chronological development of things, then it's likely that the form of literature review you chose is one that was chronologically informed. Folks, I'm going to just take a minute. I'm getting a little bit of a problem with my presentation. It's sort of frozen, and I'll just take a minute to unfreeze it. So please expect some silence. Right, folks. I hope that you are now all back. Sorry, I had a momentary problem. My screen had frozen. And because this is pre-recorded, I had to find a way to kind of deal with it. But I hope that we're back. Right. Okay, so in as much as the literature review is about the identification of literature, the different types of methodologies, it all makes sense only when it's put together. And when you put it together, you are very specific about this. You're specific about the things that you want to demonstrate when you put it together. And that, when you're putting it together, you want to put together all that is known in relation to your topic of interest. So what is it that researchers in the field know about this topic? The question that you have answered, you have identified as your question of interest. And what is it that they don't know? So in as much as it is important for you to showcase all that has been said about a topic, it is very, very important to demonstrate the things that have been missed and not captured by a particular topic. And the reason you do that is that serves as the impetus and the rationale for your own study. Because remember, your own study is you have to justify why you've decided that the thing you're studying is worth studying. So then it also gives you a foray, a way into justifying what your study will contribute. Now, literally, the next 10 or so slides, I will jump. I will give you a visual of them, but I will jump them. And that is what will happen in this minute. Folks, once again, I've had this problem with freezing, and I think what I'm going to do is actually pause this recording and start again, and you will notice that there's a part 2 to this presentation. Apologies, folks, for the break in transmission. We had to, I was having a little bit of a problem with my system. I've sorted that out. Essentially, if you remember, we kind of just touched on the introductory elements of this. But in summary, any literature review has got 4 basic tasks. And if there's anything you must remember, is that those 4 basic tasks have to be in some shape or form be communicated by whatever choice you make. So if you make a choice where you decide you'll shape your literature review in any specific way, that choice must ultimately allow you to be able it should allow you to be able to represent your literature review in a way that speaks to 4 things. The first thing is that it should have the ability to summarize. So we expect a literature review that offers the potential for you to carry out a summary of what's going on in relation to the topic, the question, the phenomena you are interested in. It should also be able to pull things together. So you synthesize the different positions that are held. What is it that people are really saying are the standout issues? Then you have to critique. You have to look at this, assess and evaluate whether these things that have been said and contributed should be believed at face value, and if not, why not? And if so, why should they be? Then, of course, you do a comparison between different things. What this 4-part analysis has failed to do is actually to give you one critical bit, and that critical bit refers to the putting it together to come to a conclusion about what is yet to be studied. So that part is the 5th leg to all this. If you can remember this slide and add the knowledge gaps, then you know you've got an entire understanding of the things that your literature review are required to do. Right. So, of course, I've spoken to you about the fact that one of the things that you're meant to do is to critically review what is out there. So you're showing the reader that you have a critical awareness of the current body of knowledge. It also helps you to look at things, how you refine your own things that you'll be interested in. It also helps you to talk about the things that have not been covered or looked at up to this point in relation to your topic. All these slides that I'm doing are actually repeating the same thing, but in different ways. Same thing, but in different ways. Now I'm going to jump these slides. I want to take us to the part where you organize or speak about the literature review. Remember, so your journey is about pulling in all these pieces of work, deciding what contributions they make, breaking them down, looking at weaknesses, looking at strengths, and so forth. But people are always thinking, how on earth do I then, after I've done all this, how do I organize it? How do I organize it so that I can present it in a chapter? And that is what essentially this topic, this session is about. And that's where we come to the first set of tools that you can use. Now, as you will soon discover, the literature review has got elements to it. It's got an introduction, it's got a body, and it's got the conclusion, like any other piece of academic work. What I am talking about is the actual body of it. I will very quickly talk about what the introduction has, but in terms of organizing the body. So you have literature. You now have literature that meets the requirements of your search, and you're thinking, how on earth do I decide to organize this literature so I can do those 4 things that a literature review can do? I want to be able to describe what's going on. I need to be able to critique it. I need to be able to evaluate it. I need to be able to do. So how do I do this? Now, people talk about certain pictorial things that one can do. And sometimes people will talk about a feature map, where feature map basically is a table. Do a table. That's with the first thing that you will look at, and then the table has successive things that you'll look at. So you know that the first thing that you're going to argue about is presented at the top, followed by other things. Or sometimes people will do a concept map. So they'll say, look, my area that I'm working with covers 3 concepts, and the concepts are generally derived from the topics that are embodied in your title. So if your title mentions student success, your title mentions intelligence, you know that the concepts that you need to map out are student success and intelligence. So you will have 2 different maps where you say, right, in relation to student success, these are the types of concepts, the processes, and the different things that I will consider as dominant arguments I must at least touch on. You can't create that, of course, without any knowledge of what's going on in the literature. So you need to have read the literature a number of times to get a sense of the concepts that matter. Or some people will talk about different types of trees. They call them concept trees, decision trees, thematic trees, and so forth. But all that it really is a depiction, a pictorial depiction of where your conversation will start and where it's going to finish. So when you organize your literature, basically what I'm saying to you is that before you can even write your literature, you need to literally sit down and draw in a diagrammatic way things like, what are the 5 or 6 arguments that are being contested in this whole field? And what are the different positions people are saying? What's the left position? What's the right position? What's the weaknesses? What's this? And you do it all in a kind of diagrammatic way. So you have literally, you draw your literature review before you write it. And then someone will say, so, but how do I organize this drawing? And the organization of the drawing relates back to the principle that you are using to organize your content. So if you are thinking, hey, my study that I'm looking at has people contesting each other because of different themes that they're following. So say if I were looking at student success, there's one theme that says student success has to do with the university or wherever you are at, that your education provider builds your success. There's another theme that says, no, that your success is dependent on who you are as a student. Then some will say, no, your success is dependent on whether you're poor or broke. Your success depends on whether the university you're at looks at things the right way, or sometimes it even blames the teacher. So those are the different themes. So you can then organize all the literature according to those themes that you're aware of, if that's how you believe your topic is best articulated. But someone else will say, no, the topic I am looking at is one that has had chronological progression. So it started in 1972 and it has become things have happened according to the years rather than according to themes. So in essence, what they're saying is that the content and the progression of their literature has been driven by chronology rather than themes. So their organizing principle is chronology. Remember, you don't have to adopt any one of these organizing principles. You can adopt more than one, but these are just some of the things that help you. So some might decide that, no, I will actually go from the way I will organize this is to look at the studies that consider specific things, then consider the ones that are general later. Or you go from general to specific. All of those are potential ideas of how you organize your content. But remember, you get a sense of how literature has been written in your topic by reading other papers, because they all had to have some literature section. They all had to organize it. So you draw from there. Now, this is the slide where everything happens. Everything that we are saying is about this session today. It's all locked up in here. Folks, don't forget the 4-5 items that I said the literature review is about. Those issues, when I spoke about the literature review being about summarization, being about synthesis, being about critique, being about comparison, and then finally being about identifying what's missing so that you can position your paper in relation to that. So those 5 tasks are already an accepted requirement within this. But when it comes to now presenting this work, so it meets those 5 tasks, here's a structure that I propose and one that has been proposed by others before me. So remember, there was that definition that talked about how a literature review should be reproducible, it should do this, it should do that. So this structure allows you to meet all those requirements and to meet them well. So the introductory part, I've called it an introduction. There are parts in the introduction. You can have an introduction, you can have definitional analysis. All of that are all things that are part of an introduction. But in the aspect of your review that you are introducing the review, people generally start by acknowledging that, chapter 1, which was the first chapter, gave a broad overview of the so-and-so, the topic that they're looking at. Then they give a roadmap of what chapter 2 will be. After they've given the roadmap, the first thing that you generally do within literature review is to allow the reader to get a sense of what your definition of a literature review is, your idea of what its purposes are, and then of course an indication of the area in which your literature review is going to focus and the methodology, the typology that you believe you will be pursuing. So you say, you're going to look at thematic patterns that have occurred over time. You'll consider chronological progressions in the way a particular topic is understood, all those things. Depending on your level of study and who you are as a student, some people will even spend a little bit of time defending the typology they've chosen. It's not a requirement, but it's one of the things people do. Then, of course, in your introductory part, not necessarily an introduction, but in the part that comes before the body, you tell us the steps that you have gone through to identify your literature. And we call those steps the data search strategy. What I ask of you is that the data search strategy element is very specific. It's quite specific. People will tell us what key search terms are used, what inclusion and exclusion criteria they applied, how they managed to move from having found 4,000 papers to the 45 that they ended up reviewing. That is what the data search strategy is all about. But to know the exact detail of one, just go Google it, look for examples of literature reviews, and you will see it. It's very straightforward. It is literally, it's just about you remembering that, hey, I need to tell people how I went about identifying the papers that I identified. Finished. That is the introductory part of the literature review. It represents about 20% of your entire piece of work as far as the literature review is concerned. Now, the body of the literature review, that's where that thing where I spoke about how you organize your papers, that's where it matters. So this is the part of the body where you summarize what's been going on, you synthesize what's been going on, you critique the different positions, you compare. Then once you've done that, you go to the conclusionary part where you summarize the key observations that you have made in relation to the arguments. What are the key things that people have agreed on? What are the key things they disagree on? What are the things where there's accepted belief by all involved that we don't have the right knowledge level to be confident about where we stand? All those things are the summary key observations. Importantly, what you want to do is to, after showing agreements, showing disagreements, showing what continues to be debated, you want to then say these are the things that have not been understood. And that is the point at which you have an opportunity to identify your study as one of those things that still appears to not have been understood. And then what you will notice, folks, is I have given some basic topic hints for what an introduction will include. I will not read into this. You will all get this presentation. You will get the paper version of it. It is actually something we extracted from a previous presentation that was done for you, but it'll give you a sense of what should be there. So if there's anything you want to take a photo of right now, so you understand what the structure of your literature review is, this is the slide. This is the slide you take. This is the slide you focus on. Because once you do this, and in your work, you are able to demonstrate that you have achieved this, now you have a literature review. So literally, I've taken this whole presentation and broken it up into two requirements that you must meet. Two requirements that you must meet. The first being that you must follow this structure. And the second being that at the end of everything you've done, you should be able to show that the piece of work that follows that structure has managed to do this in relation to your particular area of literature that you're interested in. That, folks, is what a literature review is about. So once again, I want to emphasize that this is a kind of eclectic mix of touching on the literature, theoretical perspectives, talking about the practical things, going back to the theoretical things, giving you tricks on how to survive it. But if you cannot do this session without having had an opportunity to listen to the other sessions that I've done. So in essence, really, when I say to you that this is revisiting, I'm actually being clear that you are revisiting things. You are not, it cannot be the first session that you attend in relation to this, because it is you revisiting the field rather than visiting it for the first time. So please remember that, folks. Now, we've come to the end of the session. Typically, you would have an opportunity to ask questions. but because this is a pre-recorded session, we do not have that potential. So what we will do is in the next couple of weeks, when people have had opportunity to all listen to this, we will have an opportunity where you can have a chance to now come back for a question and answer session. With that said, I want to thank you all for availing yourself to this. I hope we will get back to the live sessions as soon as we are back to a stable format. Thank you very much.